The rain on the battlements of Hogwarts did not taste like water that night. It tasted like copper and ozone, the unmistakable flavor of raw, unstable magic bleeding into the atmosphere. Tobias Finch, a seventh-year Hufflepuff who had spent most of his academic career being told he was too passive for Duel Club and too abstract for Transfiguration, wiped the wet hair from his eyes. He was trembling, not from the cold, though the Scottish wind was biting through his robes, but from the sheer mathematical impossibility of what he was looking at. 32. He had counted them twice as the lightning flashed over the Forbidden Forest. 32 distinct figures in black cloaks standing at the edge of the suspension bridge. The wards were down for maintenance on the west sector, a calculated risk by the Order of the Phoenix that had turned into a catastrophic error. The castle was practically empty, save for the house elves, a few sleeping portraits, and Tobias, who had drawn the short straw for the midnight perimeter check. He was 20 yards above them, hidden by the gargoyle of a weeping angel, clutching a wand that felt like a twig against an avalanche. 32 Death Eaters against one student who had barely scraped an acceptable in defense against the dark arts. He checked his pockets, 2 dung bombs, a half-eaten licorice wand, and a piece of parchment containing the arithmancy calculations for a spell his roommates called the Finch Folly. If he ran to the Gryffindor Tower to sound the alarm, they would breach the courtyard before he climbed the first staircase. If he sent a Patronus, the bright light would give away his position instantly, and he would be dead within 3 seconds. The math was brutal. It was a war equation with no remainder. He had to hold the bridge, alone, against 32 killers who were expecting a massacre. He looked at his wand. It was trembling because he was terrified, but also because he was about to attempt a piece of magic that required the delicate touch of a watchmaker while staring down the barrel of a cannon. The spell was supposed to be a joke. It was an atmospheric charm designed to mimic the ambient sounds of a busy common room to help people sleep. But Tobias had tweaked it. He had layered it. He had amplified it. If you want to know how this forgotten wizard turned a useless parlor trick into the only thing standing between Hogwarts and a midnight slaughter, stay with me until the end of this story. The first green jet of light hit the stone railing 3 feet to Tobias's left. The impact sent shrapnel flying into his cheek, cutting the skin. They hadn't seen him, not really. They were just firing suppression shots, clearing the high ground like professionals. These weren't the Snatchers or the chaotic werewolf packs. These were the Inner Circle's shock troops. They moved in silence, a coordinated fluid mass of black smoke and malice. Tobias squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't need to see them. He needed to hear the space they occupied. He whispered the incantation, not a shout, but a hiss of breath that traveled through the wood of his wand. Sonorous Phantasma. Most wizards think of combat in terms of light. Red stunners, green killing curses, purple hexes. Tobias thought in terms of volume. The air on the bridge suddenly grew heavy. dropping 10 degrees in temperature. A thick, rolling fog began to seep up from the ravine below, not white and fluffy, but gray and oily. The Death Eaters paused. The leader, a tall man whose mask reflected the moonlight, raised a hand. Then the sound began. It wasn't the sound of a spell. It was the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots, iron-shod boots on stone, hundreds of them. In the flashback of his mind, Tobias was back in the Hufflepuff common room 3 months ago. He was sitting in the corner, surrounded by crumpled balls of parchment. "It's useless, Tobbs," his friend Sarah had said, laughing gently as she floated a book over his head. "So you can make it sound like a parade as passing by. Who cares? It doesn't stun, it doesn't shield, it doesn't disarm. It's a party trick." Tobias had smiled then, a small, sad smile. "Fear is about perception, Sarah. If I can make you believe there's a dragon in the room, your heart rate goes up just the same as if there was one." "But there isn't a dragon," she had countered. "Not yet," he had whispered. Back on the battlements, the reality of the dragon was taking shape. The 32 Death Eaters shifted formation. They heard the marching. It was coming from the courtyard end of the bridge, directly in front of them. But looking through the fog, they saw nothing but shifting shadows. "Hold!" the leader's voice carried over the wind. "It's a trap. They knew we were coming." Tobias, huddled behind the gargoyle, felt a bead of sweat roll down his nose. Maintaining the auditory illusion was like holding a heavy weight with an outstretched arm. His muscles burned. He had to synchronize the footfalls. 150 phantom soldiers. Left, right, left. He added the clatter of armor, the unsheathing of swords. Then he made his first tactical move. He cast a Ventus charm, but he didn't aim it at the Death Eaters. He aimed it through the fog, angling it so the wind screamed like a charging griffin. The front line of the Death Eaters flinched. 2 of them fired killing curses blindly into the mist. The green light illuminated nothing but swirling vapor, but the sound of the curses exploding against the stone echoed brilliantly, magnified by Tobias's spell. "Return fire!" someone screamed from the back of the Death Eater pack. "Wait, you fools! You'll hit the vanguard!" the leader shouted. But panic is a contagious disease. Tobias bit his lip until it bled. He had to sell the scale. He twisted his wand in a sharp corkscrew motion, a movement that made his wrist crack. He layered in the sound of shouting, order members' voices. He mimicked Kingsley Shacklebolt's booming baritone, shouting, "Flank them! Take no prisoners!" It was a lie, constructed of air and vibration. But in the dark, under the rain, with adrenaline pumping, it felt like the truth. The Death Eaters broke formation. They were no longer facing an empty castle. In their minds, they were walking into an ambush of the entire Order of the Phoenix. Spells began to fly in earnest now. Red and green lights tore through the fog. The Death Eaters were firing at phantoms. But here was the genius of the layout. The bridge was narrow. As the rear guard tried to retreat, they bumped into the forward guard trying to advance. Tobias watched, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He saw a Death Eater take a stunner to the chest, fired by one of his own comrades in the confusion. 1 down. 31 to go. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts is already touching your heart and you'd like to help keep these stories alive, you can support the channel by clicking the thanks button below the video. Every little bit helps me continue bringing you more hidden tales of courage and magic. The strain was becoming unbearable. The illusion required constant focus. If Tobias thought about his cold hands or his fear for even a second, the marching feet would stutter, the phantom voices would loop, and the game would be up. He was burning through his magical core faster than if he were casting unforgivable curses. He made a mistake. He tried to make the phantom army charge too quickly. The sound of the running feet outpaced the visual of the fog, creating a dissonance. The Death Eater leader, a veteran of the First War, noticed. He froze, his wand raised. "Stop!" he bellowed, his voice magically amplified. "Cease fire! There are no impacts! Look, our spells are passing through them!" The firing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The fog swirled innocently. The marching sound faltered, sounding for a moment like a broken record player, before Tobias clamped down on his concentration, forcing it back into rhythm. But it was too late. "It's a trick!" the leader snarled, stepping forward, his mask falling away to reveal a scarred face. "It's an illusion! Someone is playing with us! Find them! Kill them slowly!" They began to scan the battlements. Tobias pressed his back against the cold stone. He was done. He was exhausted. He had bought maybe 4 minutes. It wasn't enough. The order wouldn't be here for another 10. He looked at the dung bombs in his pocket. Ridiculous. But then he remembered the acoustics of the bridge. He remembered the way sound traveled in the ravine. He didn't need to be an army anymore. He needed to be the monster. Tobias stood up. He didn't hide. He stood right on the edge of the parapet, visible in the flash of lightning. "There!" a Death Eater shouted. "It's just a boy! One boy!" Laughter rippled through the ranks of the dark wizards. It was a terrible, relieving sound for them. They had been scared of ghosts, and now they found a Hufflepuff student with a trembling wand. "Leave him to me," the leader sneered, raising his wand. "Avada!" Tobias didn't cast a shield. He pointed his wand not at the wizard, but at the throat of the ravine below the bridge. He poured every ounce of his remaining magic, every happy memory, every frustration, every drop of fear into one final auditory hallucination. He didn't mimic a soldier. He mimicked the sound of the Hogwarts wards shattering. It is a sound no wizard wants to hear. It is the sound of a catastrophic magical failure, a deep tectonic groan like the earth splitting apart, followed by the high-pitched scream of ancient magic dying. It is the sound of the castle itself collapsing. He paired it with a tactile illusion, a localized earthquake charm on the bridge itself. To the 31 remaining Death Eaters, it felt and sounded like the bridge they were standing on was disintegrating under the weight of the castle's failing magic. Panic overrides logic, always. "The structure is failing!" someone screamed. The discipline evaporated instantly. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were rats on a sinking ship. They scrambled, they pushed, they shoved. In their haste to get off the collapsing bridge, they forgot the basics of movement. 2 Death Eaters were shoved over the low railing, plummeting into the darkness below. 3 more tripped over their own robes and were trampled by their terrified allies. The leader tried to maintain order. "Stand fast, it's a lie!" But he was knocked sideways by a fleeing subordinate. Tobias watched the chaos, his vision blurring. Blood was dripping from his nose onto his robes. The bridge was fine. The stone was solid. But the Death Eaters were tearing themselves apart to escape a doom that didn't exist. One of them, in a blind panic, fired a blasting curse at the ground to clear a path, which actually did damage the bridge. Stone shattered. The gap widened. Now they were fighting each other to jump the gap. It was ugly. It was chaotic. It was completely unheroic. And it was working. By the time the first authentic crack of apparition signaled the arrival of the Order of the Phoenix, only 12 Death Eaters remained on the bridge, and they were battered, bruised, and hexed by their own wands. Remus Lupin landed on the courtyard side, wand raised, expecting a legion. He saw the scattered bodies of dark wizards, the groaning men clutching broken limbs, and the terror in the eyes of the few still standing. He looked up at the battlements. He saw Tobias Finch slump against the gargoyle, his wand rolling out of his limp fingers. The remaining Death Eaters, seeing a fresh, real combatant like Lupin, didn't even try to fight. They had been psychologically dismantled. They cracked away, fleeing into the night, leaving their wounded behind. The silence that returned to the grounds was heavy and wet. Tobias woke up in the hospital wing 3 days later. The sun was streaming through the high windows, turning the dust motes into gold. He tried to sit up, but his head felt like it had been split open and stitched back together. Madame Pomfrey was there instantly, pushing him back down. "Rest, Mr. Finch. You have severe magical exhaustion. You nearly burned out your core." "The bridge?" he croaked, his voice sounding like sandpaper. "Still standing," a voice said from the doorway. Kingsley Shacklebolt stood there, looking out of place in the pristine infirmary with his traveling cloak and gold earring. He walked to the foot of the bed. "We interrogated one of the men we captured," Kingsley said, his voice low. "He kept raving about the Ghost Regiment, said there were hundreds of us, said the castle screamed." Tobias managed a weak shrug. "It was just a noise charm, sir, a distraction." Kingsley looked at the boy, ordinary, unassuming, a student whose name he hadn't known until yesterday. "You held a strategic choke point against 32 combatants with nothing but a noise charm, Mr. Finch. You didn't just distract them, you routed them." There was no medal ceremony. The ministry was too chaotic, and the war was too secret for public accolades. Tobias Finch went back to his classes. He still sat in the back of the room. He still wasn't picked for the dueling team. But sometimes, when the older students walked past him in the corridor, they would tap their ears and nod respectfully. The story of the Ghost Regiment was written down in a small classified file in the Auror office, labeled Unconventional Tactics. It served as a reminder that in magic, raw power is often secondary to the mind that wields it. Tobias had proven that you don't need to cast a killing curse to destroy an enemy. You just need to make them believe they are already dead. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts touched your heart, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Tobias's place? Would you have run, or would you have tried to bluff the Dark Lord's army? Like the video, share it with another Harry Potter fan, and subscribe to hear more hidden stories of courage, magic, and impossible odds. Sometimes the loudest magic is the one that makes no sound at all until it's too late.